And here we are on episode 2 of Dawning on Deming. And today we have Robin Lee with us today. Hey, Robin, how are you?
Hi,
I'm doing okay. We're holding on. We've got about a little less than 2 weeks before this semester is done. So, Robin, you were a transfer student, yeah, and you're a senior now.
yeah, I'm a senior now, and maybe I will take another year to prepare for the graduate school. So I may
Okay,
become a super senior.
you'll be
Yeah,
a real super senior for one semester or
yeah,
2 semesters.
maybe 2 semesters.
Okay, yeah. The term super senior is our like ENB in the United States, yeah. So if you do anything
Uh,
more than 4 years, which is actually very normal in the United States, yeah, it's very difficult to graduate in 4 years because people work and stuff. But
okay.
okay, well, Robin, do you mind if we get right into it? Because today's episode is once again on Inside Bill's Brain, but this time the focus is on: is the host too close? Is the host a little bit too impartial, a little bit too friendly with Bill
Yeah.
Gates? So the first thing I just want to start with is one thing you liked about the documentary and one thing you didn't like, and any order works. So you can talk about what you liked first and or what you didn't like first.
Okay. So one thing I do like about this documentary is how it portrayed Bill Gates. So the tempo is smooth, and some of the ideas in this documentary are inspirational. Like take Think Week, for example.
Mm,
This is absolutely a great idea for people in the modern world. We
mm,
are filled with too much information we don't need, and
mm,
we don't usually give us some time to calm down and think of something that matters.
mm,
Or or how he is a big fan of books. So, as the inventor of Microsoft, he doesn't absorb all information or knowledge from internet. So instead, he chooses real books and reads them. I
mm,
think that is worth noticing since he's an owner of a big tech.
mm,
So
mm,
I believe the reason is that books won't be affected by the algorithm.
mm,
It becomes the most effective way to expose yourself to the information that you might never know
mm,
before.
mm,
So I'm not saying that algorithm is bad, but because it will provide us information that fits our preference, we are
mm,
stuck in our echo chamber without being aware of that. So I
mm,
think the strategy that Bill Gates take is quite smart, quite clever. Yeah.
mm, mm,
And so the other thing, one thing I didn't like about documentaries that I think this documentary is trying to rationalize every incident in Bill Gates' life, especially for those controversial ones. So, take the monopoly case, for example, the explanation is interesting.
mm,
And it gives us some new angle to think of the case,
mm,
actually. And it's interesting.
mm,
But it also gives me a feeling that the director is trying to defend Bill Gates. Maybe what they said is right, but the way to portray the scene is not neutral and objective.
mm, mm. Okay, well, it's funny actually. One thing I was going to ask originally was about something that I never mentioned, and there's been a couple things that you already mentioned that I never really thought about. First off, I think that you were in my oral training 2. It's the second semester of the sophomore
Yeah.
oral training course, and I show the social dilemma, and
Mm,
that's when I thought about algorithms, but I never actually connected algorithms to inside Bill's brain. Then also too, there's this idea of not being at peace, but kind of separating yourself and having time to slow down and think. You were mentioning something along those lines. I didn't really think about that as much. So there's a
oh,
there's
really?
yeah, there's already a couple things that I'm going to steal in the future. Maybe I'll just have to bring
Okay.
you into class or something. Yeah, and you've actually used a couple of the words that I was thinking about. One, if I was to teach my students 3 words for this episode, one would be bias, which is, I think, a good translation. I don't know if it's Pian-Gen, if that's okay. So I would say this documentary is biased towards Gates, right? There's a kind
Mm,
of a pro Gates bias, yeah.
yeah.
And then because it's always treating him nicely, which is something that you mentioned. And then the word impartial, which you could also say partial. I'm partial to. If I say I'm partial to pizza, it means I really like pizza. So I think this documentary, um, yeah, is it impartial towards Gates? Maybe not. Yeah. Uh, and then objective, yeah. There's the meaning of mubiao, but also kegwan, and so
Mm,
not mubiao, but more kegwan. A documentary should be objective, and yeah.
yeah.
So I think this the problem with the documentary is a little bit too subjective, a little bit too partial, a little bit biased, and
Mm,
Now, and some of the things I was thinking about was that were problematic to me. And then if you have any issues or any scenes that you thought of, go ahead and mention them. The one thing was they were playing cards together. They were playing war, and they're having all this fun together. or
Yeah.
how Davis Guggenheim, the director, kind of walks behind Bill Gates on these long walks in nature. It just seems like he's almost a fanboy. And I don't
Hmm.
want to disparage Guggenheim because I think he's a fantastic director, and this is one of my favorite documentaries I've ever watched. And then
Yeah.
Guggenheim actually calls Gates his friend. I think in the first episode, he's mentioning that he saw Gates one time reading a whole bunch of high school state budgets, and then yeah, some of the problems I had was at the only time I really remember anything critical was at the opening credits, right when you see the title, and I think that they mention about is Microsoft a monopoly. There's this one line: Gates wants us to think he's Edison when he's really Rockefeller, which is never explained. And then
Yeah.
there's mentioning, did Gates steal source code from IBM, and then Gates speeding his car too quickly. There's all this stuff that gets brought up in the very first couple minutes, but then I never see the documentary actually go into that any further, other than a way is to defend Bill Gates, which is something that you've mentioned. So Robin, would you like to share anything about some scenes or some aspects that you thought were problematic?
So I think this is another part that I have some doubts about this documentary. So it seems that it is only the thing that you mentioned is only a hook to attract the audience to watch this film. Though they do mention the monopoly case, but
Mm,
I think the scene and how they work on this is like they really focus on Bill Gates' mind state,
mm,
but not the incident itself.
mm,
So it kind of and the explanation is like few. So
mm,
I don't
mm,
think they really answer those uh issues or topics that they throw to the audience.
mm. Yeah, you almost have to go do some research yourself. Yeah, I really like the point that they're always mentioning what is Bill Gates' state of mind. How does he see the monopoly? Yeah, but they don't really go
Yeah.
into Netscape's opinion or anything in depth that would be an expert on the outside who's a little bit more critical
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
Microsoft or Gates. Yeah. Hmm. Okay, is there anything else you want to mention, or should we move on to the last two questions?
Maybe to the last two questions.
Okay, and then was there anything that you saw that was a red flag to you?
So, what I saw a red flag is definitely the relationship between the director and Gates.
Hmm.
Because of their friendship, the documentary gives me a feeling that this is just a friend of Gates telling stories about him, and it makes the whole documentary less neutral and objective, and that is why I'm really concerned about.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, and it makes me like I'm watching a film that's full of fans of
Hmm.
games or something.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that's funny. Like he has all these friends that he grew up with who were at the beginning of Microsoft or
Mm,
even later on the executives. Yeah, kind of like people who are always on his side. Yeah.
yeah, I
They.
think the director is trying to make Bill Gates to like closer to everyone, including the audience. It makes things like
Hmm.
more, make it more like a human being that is
Hmm.
close to us or something. But
Hmm.
actually, I think that is a little bit too much.
Hmm.
A little
Hmm.
bit too
And maybe it succeeded because I before I watched this, I wasn't like really that. I don't know why I watched it with my wife the first time. I
much.
felt like Bill Gates is a successful person, and I want to know about
Mm.
him. And I was actually very moved emotionally, so maybe that's why.
But that is the reason why I like this documentary as well, since it makes him like a normal human being, just
Mm,
like us. Like
mm,
he struggles, he
mm,
suffer, he has some problems and difficulties.
mm,
He must deal with it,
mm,
deal with that or something. But
mm,
maybe that is not a good strategy to make a neutral, objective documentary, but it is a good strategy to make a good film. Yeah.
mm, mm.
Mm.
Yeah, that's another thing too. It's I think sometimes in the United States we say if this was to be done by the right, which I would say Guggenheim is kind of on the left, he's more democratic,
Mm.
more liberal.
Yeah.
We would kind of there'd be some red flags and hey, can we trust it? And now it's just a little bit too chummy, yeah. And I
Mm.
did see some things that criticized. the documentary. So there's this one lakeside principal, and Gates's kids went there, and so Gates is, friends with this guy, but he's also giving money to this school, this private school. Yeah. So there's a lot of conflicts of interest, which didn't really bother me as much as Guggenheim playing cards.
Okay.
So yeah, the last question: is it okay for the director to be the friend of the documentaries? I say subject. Maybe subject's not right. Like the focus, because I've heard that you don't have a research subject if it's a person because we're not lab rats. But I was trying to think of the right term. Yeah. Do you think that's okay, or is it something that should be avoided at all costs?
I believe this is the difficulty of making documentary. So if you don't know the subject well enough, you may not have some great materials or some interesting stories from the subject. But however, if you become too close to the subject, your thinking will be affected by the relationship between you and the subject. But basically, I think this is the issue that the director must conquer. How to deal with this kind of relationship and remain neutral and objective is always a big topic or big issue that the director must face. Yeah.
I actually think that's the best way to end this show today. We've actually gone a little bit past 10 minutes, unfortunately. So if anyone wanted a 10-minute show, they're going to spend 2 minutes. But I think that's the perfect way to say, yeah. It's difficult because the closer you get to somebody, even if they were originally your enemy, probably the more you like them in the end. So there's always going to be that issue of getting too close to somebody, no matter whether you at the very beginning were friends or you became friends later on. Well, thank you, Robin, so much for joining me on Dawning on Deming. And I guess I'll see you in class. Maybe Wednesday. Who knows?
Maybe.
We have a biased podcast. Teacher and student. Okay, well, thank you so much. You have a lovely night.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Yeah.